But chaos and further suffering. You can sit down. Chaos and further suffering. For the West as well, but especially for North Koreans and for the rest and for the entire world. Alright? It is essential that a transformation of society, as fundamental as we want it to be, as we all want it to be, comes from within. From within. That is the only way it is going to work. Alright? Why from within? Because of the importance of a sense of identity and pride in culture and country, which is everywhere. Alright? Nationalism. Nationalism has been responsible for tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of deaths. It has been responsible for 2 world wars and, most tragically, in 1839, Belgian independence. It is that prevalent that even Belgians can independently run the country because of it. Alright? But it is part of human nature. The desire for self-determination and freedom from outside rule is part of human nature, and we simply must deal with it. The proposition is completely ignoring that reality. We cannot go into North Korea, bomb them, throw around some hamburgers, and then think that they will accept us as a savior, alright? It is just not going to happen. Alright. Alright. And consider what they are going to think of us when their first unfiltered view of the West and the world at large, but I'm not going to include China because, you know, are you going to invite the Martians to invade with you as well? What the hell is that about? Alright, okay. Undoubtedly, their view of the West, if we invade them, is going to be that we are imperialists, we impose values, we impose a revolution upon them. Even though, as we think it is better for them, but they are going to think that it is being imposed upon them. They do not have a sense of freedom. They do not have a sense of what that is, and therefore it is not going to work if it is imposed from the outside. On that topic.
Are you denigrating the People's Republic of China?
Microphone. Are you denigrating the People's Republic of China and by implication the entire UN Security Council?
No, I'm denigrating you for thinking that China is going to invade North Korea. Thank you. But the question is are transformations of society as fundamental as we want them to be in North Korea possible? And for putting that hat on, I'll take your question.
So I hope. Could you also address those people who came, the North Korean people who came to the Security Council begging for assistance?
Yes, I will. Because what matters is that in the long term, revolutions only work when they are imposed or when they're not imposed, but when they come from within. That is the point. We must think of the long-term consequences of our actions, because eventually we all want what is best for North Korean people. But that is not what is going to happen when we invade them and bomb them with burgers. Sit down, alright? Okay. Transformations of society in a totalitarian state are possible, and they do come from within. They do come from within. Burma is a perfect example of this, and it is happening right now. A country that 4 years ago was so isolated that it let 138,000 of its citizens die in a cyclone rather than accept foreign aid, has, over the last few months, allowed an opposition party to organize, has released thousands of political prisoners, and it has announced that it will hold free elections with UN monitoring. When did we bomb Burma? I didn't see it, alright? It happened without imposing it from the outside, and it is possible. And I'll tell you why it happens and how it happens. It happens in 2 ways. Change by the regime is the first one. This is what happened in Burma, and it is not unrealistic. Sit down. The regime gives in to international pressures and sanctions because it realizes that it is in their interest. Alright? This is what happened in Burma. They were so crippled by international sanctions, and its only trading partner, China, did not give it what it needed. They realized that being part of the world community is better for them as well as for their people than is being outside of it. Alright? Burma is a good example of this, but China is too. They realized this 30 years ago, and they've opened up their country, and their people may not be free yet, and that is dreadful, but their living conditions have severely improved over the past 30 years. Nobody can deny that. If we had bombed China 30 years ago, they would not have been in a good society, and it would have been much worse than it was now. The second way in which it can change is changed by the people. The people can rise up collectively and demand regime change, or a little bit more realistically, in North Korea, they can demand at least basic human rights for themselves. Sit down. It is a myth that North Korea is isolated, alright? It is a myth. They have cell phones that are manufactured from Egypt, smuggled in through South Korea, paid for by dollars and euros. Their borders are not closed. They know what goes on in the world. But we must make an effort to penetrate the veil that is around North Korean society, because it does exist, we do not deny that. But it is not waterproof, and we can broaden the minds of the North Korean people, and we must try that, because we must try to encourage them to change by themselves. These are the only two ways in which revolutions can happen, alright? What we need is a Korean revolution, not an Iraq on steroids. That is what they're proposing. They want to repeat Iraq, and we want peace and security for the North Korean people. Thank you.
Thank you ever so much. Now I'd like to call to the front the last speaker of the government, Mr. Michael Burke. Give it up for Michael Burke!
Thank you. I think it was a linguistic slip there. When you said North Korea had cell phones, I think you meant cells full of people who were tortured continually. I'd like to start by congratulating the opposition. I thought they debated quite well for a bunch of amateurs. But there are 2 points I'd like to make before I come to the arguments. The first one, quite trivial. The second one, serious. I thought they might have dressed for the occasion. I can only assume that their mother's washing machines have broken down. Shame indeed, yes. But a more serious point is, why are there no women on your team? It strikes me that was the biggest shame of this whole evening. I mean, unbelievable. Some of the best debaters in this university are women. I know, I taught them, and I taught this lot as well. Barbara, our captain, is a leading light, and I think this team should have... no, I'll take your question later when I get onto the arguments. So what have we been debating here? What has it been about? Well, essentially, do we support the status quo, the poverty, the starvation, the rape, the murder, something that didn't come up, the medical experimentation on political prisoners that takes place in the prisons? Do we support all that? Or do we say, hey, it's enough? We heard there's a legal basis. It's not just a moral basis, it's a legal basis now. So, it's about time we went down that road. And the reason we can argue this now, and not in... I'll take your comment.
Sorry.
Just because the situation is horrible doesn't mean the best solution is necessarily to bomb them, shoot them, and then give them hamburgers.
Thank you. That comment was almost relevant. Why can we discuss this now and not in 3 or 4 or 5 months' time? Because there's an opening. We call it in rhetoric kairos. There's a moment. There's a moment here. The leadership has changed. That tin pot, crackpot dictatorship, a kind of hereditary tyranny, I don't know what you call it really. The old guy has died, the new guy's in. Inexperienced, he's being pulled one way and the other by the communists and by the army and by all kinds of factions. On top of that, the Chinese are moving further and further and further away from those crackpots. This idea that there's somehow China's somehow reliant on North Korean trade is just well, unbelievable. Russia, you know, getting weaker and weaker by the day. The more people get out on the streets of Moscow and protest against that idiot, the better. This is the time. This is the time now in these 2 or 3 months. It may not be possible come the summer. So that's why all the arguments, the crystal clear arguments that my colleagues have put forward should be heeded. And their long ramblings, I mean, Willem's cacophony of fear appeals, they were quite impressive. Very little evidence, but very impressive. I'll take your point.
What is so great about the Iraq War that you want to repeat it?
Iraq War.
That was almost interesting. I know you're trying to drag me into a different discussion, but I really want to talk about North Korea. After all, that is in the motion. Are we going to continue this cult of personality where people are brainwashed not just by propaganda, but by a stick, by a gun, and by even worse than that? No, you've got to choose. In a few minutes' time, it'll be up to you. I read recently a UN report that said the average salary at this moment in time is kind of $2 a month in North Korea. And they're working, they're selling, the businesses on the side are generating a bit of money illegally, which probably amounts to about $15. Now, back in, not too long ago, about 2006, they were on about $70 a month. So it's getting worse. It's getting worse with the creation of this nuclear project, the uranium project, from about 2008. All the money's going there. Those people are starving to death. It's not a secret. Everybody knows it. Their solution? Do nothing. Is that really the solution? And you know, we talk about human rights, and we're all allowed to have access to those human rights. But apparently not the North Koreans. They're somehow excluded. They're somehow not quite as human as we are. Subhuman? Well, I don't think so. And neither do my members of the government. War's not a great thing. In fact, it's a damn awful thing. But for these kind of medieval, torturous societies to exist in this day and age, it's just not acceptable anymore. Not acceptable. We need to do something about it. It won't be easy, but we need to go in there and do something about it. You don't just need to listen to the United Nations. All kinds of human rights organisations, from Amnesty International to Human Rights Watch and lots of smaller ones underground there, have said that without a shadow of a doubt, North Korea is the country that abuses human rights the most. In sum, ladies and gentlemen, seize the day. Strike while the iron is hot. It's now. It's up to you. It's your choice. Support humanity. Oppose tyranny.
Thank you very much, Mr. Burke. Now I'd like to give the word to the last speaker of the opposition, Bas Tonissen. Give it up! Give it up!
Lame. Let me organize this. Jesus.
He's not going to help you.
Now we're good. Alright. No reading. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Burke's speech was just like his courses. Too easy. What the proposition tries to do for you is to create a wasteland and then call that peace. And I think it is actually despicable to do what closing government is doing here. To use the suffering, the horrible suffering that we've consistently acknowledged on our side of the North Korean people as an excuse, as a way of luring you into and emotionally trying to trick you into supporting an intervention that will only make life worse for the North Koreans, for the people in the West, for the people in China, and for basically the entire world. I think that is really something that a rhetoric teacher should not be doing to you. By the way, to respond to Dr. Berg's derogatory comments, it's clear he knows a lot about rhetoric. We'd be happy to invite him to Socrates so we can teach him some proper argumentation too. In my speech, I am going to do a few very basic things. I'm going to oppose their North Korea to our North Korea on the short term and on the long term, and in that I will try to interweave all the fundamental points that came up throughout this debate. And I first want to say that something that has struck me throughout the entire debate was it was so typical from opening gov. I mean, they're all teachers on war, right? So of course they spent minutes and minutes explaining exactly how they were going to invade, with what weapons, which countries, exactly how the war was going to go. And they spent literally nothing, aside from some blabbering about hamburgers and concerts, on how to build a sustainable future for the North Korean people after the invasion. And I think that is really typical warmongering that we should fundamentally, principally oppose. And I'll take your point, Ms. Oomen.
Will you please, in your speech, also address the human rights situation?
Yes, of course I will. Actually, yeah, I'll go into that right now, but wait for it because it's going to be in my summary, because of course it's important, and we think we agree. So right, on the short term, what is the North Korea that they envision? Basically, there's a few things that they haven't responded to, right? The whole nukes issue, they basically just said, well, I don't know, if we give them burgers, it's going to be okay, they won't send nukes, or if we attack their computers. We don't buy that, ladies and gentlemen. We think it's pretty credible, or at least risky enough. At least these people have nukes, and they may use them. That alone, we think, is very, very problematic, will cause massive death, and we think that's pretty horrible. Sit down, sir. We also haven't talked at all. I can't take everybody, guys. They haven't talked at all about the indoctrination that takes place in the North Korean society. Did you know that when Kim Jong-il was born, his birth is heralded by a swallow flying through the sky, and a new star suddenly shone upon it at the moment of his birth? And did you know he wrote 15,000 books when he was in college? And did you know he carries over 200 titles, among which Glorious General from Heaven and Guiding Star of the 21st Century? We think that if even a part of North Korean society buys this crap, and they will because they have nothing else to believe in, ladies and gentlemen, that it's going to be incredibly problematic if we, the Western societies, the white men, will go in there and say, you know what, we'll just shoot your leader, without any plan on who is going to replace him. Because we never heard that, right? We haven't heard who is going to be the new government. And then just say, guys, so we deposed him, no need to thank us for it, here's some burgers, bye. We think that this is going to create a completely divided society. You've already had your chance, sorry. A completely divided society. A society that now sees that everything they've been told about the West, being nasty, hating them, wanting them to die, is true. Because the first thing they see when the veil is lifted is that the West is attacking them. We see that China will go, what the fuck's going on here? Because obviously they try to sneak China in there, but that's completely unrealistic. We're talking Mars here. It's basically, China has consistently always opposed action against North Korea, has always vetoed any constructive action against it, and we don't think you can just say, well, but because Giles Scott Smith said so, they're probably going to join us, because they will. I mean, that's complete bullshit, right? So, we also think they have no plan whatsoever for how this nation is going to be economically prosperous, and who is going to lead them into this economic prosperity. We think that's going to be pretty horrible, because if they're still dying of malnutrition when they're free and have a democracy, you know what might happen? You get Russian situations where you have old women, like after the Soviet Union fell, old women sitting by the fireplace, looking all grumpy, going, well, at least in the days of Stalin, we had bread. And we think that that kind of society, that longs back, where you get this narrative about a history in which things were at least borderline organized, because there is no organization in the proposition plan. We think if you create that kind of narrative, you are condemning the North Korean people to decades, maybe hundreds of more years of instability, of fractions, of warmongering amongst themselves, and of complete and utter economic failure. And we don't think we can just do that to them. Sit down, please.
Every time I hear you speak, all of you, about nuclear arms, I have a déjà vu. It's almost like I hear a staff member of the Bush administration 2004. They have mass destruction weapons in Iraq, they all have. Where is your proof? You're indoctrinated by the North Korean propaganda.
Sir! The whole doctrine that these people are in such a horrible situation, we should definitely invade them and just see what happens, sounds pretty George W. Bush administration to me. And second of all, we think that when you ended up invading the country, regardless of mass destruction weapons, that didn't really go that well now, did it? So we think this doesn't really fly. We all want North Korean people to be happy, alright? We all say that we want them to be prosperous in the long term. And of course we see that they are suffering and we think this is horrible. But we think that there are some good prospects here. We think the borders are growing increasingly porous. We think there is a good chance that maybe Kim Jong-un will pull a Myanmar, a Burma, and say, I'm new here, and you know what, I may not survive this on my own with all these sanctions against me. Maybe I should reform. We think that there's a good chance that there will be inside change. That's what it's all about. It's only a self-determined people saying, we want to change, we want this new leader, can ever be truly free, truly prosperous, and that you must support. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Also, thank you all very, very much for this debate. I myself thought it was highly enjoyable. I actually thought it was awesome. Come on, guys! Come on! Thank you. So what we're going to do now? We're going to grab a beer. Have like 15 minutes of break. After 15 minutes, please be back. Because what you're going to do after the break is you're going to decide who won this one awesome debate. No. So guys, off for drinks. There you go. See you in 15.